The woman in the black coat stepped through the cocktail crowd at the Lakeshore Regent and asked, with professional calm, whether Reed Barron was present, and every glass nearby seemed to stop midair. He turned with that polished half-smile he saved for donors and hotel owners, one hand around a champagne flute. Celeste Dunn angled neatly beside his shoulder. When she placed the envelope into his hand and told him he had been served, the room did not go silent at once. It tightened first. I had been standing near a pillar with sparkling water for 11 minutes. Long enough to watch Reed work the room and long enough to watch Celeste mirror him. Her laugh had landed on his sleeve twice. His fingers had settled once at her waist. And those two small facts had already told me everything. So when he found my face beyond the process server's shoulder, what reached me first was not panic but recognition. The look of a man suddenly counting backward. I walked to them before anyone could recover and held out the second envelope to Celeste, who took it without touching me, as if distance might still help. Reed used to call my atelier the scent thing, so I gave him the cleanest truth I owned. That thing paid this house. And your lies paid for hotels. Then I left him holding the papers, the champagne, and the last version of himself that still believed I would make this easier somehow. 12 days earlier, on a gray Thursday in Chicago, I was finishing a tray of bergamot welcome vials for a lakeside wedding when Reed called with news he had chased for nearly a year. His firm had landed the flagship hospitality contract he wanted, the one that would move him from promising to established, and his voice came through bright with the relief of arrival. I told him I was proud of him and began wrapping a private congratulations set from my atelier, because celebrating him had become one of the quiet jobs folded into being his wife. I built custom fragrance collections for weddings, private dinners, and boutique hotels, and I built them from the coach house behind the brick home my aunt left me before I married. For 8 years, Reed treated that work like a charming domestic habit, calling it the scent thing, with a smile that passed easily in public because contempt sounds harmless when dressed well. I let that language live in my house and my head longer than I should have, even while invoices cleared, clients returned, and subscription orders proved my business was not delicate. Our marriage had learned the shape of his ambition so completely that my flexibility began to look, even to me, like my natural size inside it. Canceled dinners, postponed weekends, late nights blamed on proposals and presentations all became ordinary enough that his success felt shared, while my work stayed framed as background. So I packed the gift, straightened my coat, and headed downtown believing I was bringing something elegant to a man I loved, not walking toward the hour that would measure us correctly at last. By the time I reached Reed's office in River North, the gift box was still cool against my palms, and I was still carrying the last clean version of that day. The receptionist looked up, saw me, then looked past me toward the closed brainstorming room with a hesitation so brief it would have disappeared if I had not already loved that office enough to know its usual rhythm. When I told her I had only brought something to celebrate, she said Reed was tied up. Celeste was with him, and the careful evenness in her voice landed harder than any warning would have. I walked past the row of glass offices anyway, because being a wife gives you 1,000 small permissions before it teaches you which ones were never real. Reed's door was open, his desk lit, his jacket slung over the chair, and the sight of those ordinary details made what waited beyond them feel, for one suspended second, impossible. Then I shifted near the half-frosted partition, and there they were in the adjoining room. Celeste backed against the table edge, Reed close enough that no one could have mistaken where his hand belonged or why her mouth curved before he touched it. Nothing in that room looked accidental. Not the ease of their bodies. Not the softness of her face. Not the fact that neither of them carried the startled distance of two people caught in a first mistake. I set the gift box on his desk, took the card from beneath the ribbon, and wrote only, "Congratulations," because anything longer would have belonged to the woman who had entered the building, not the one leaving it. I rode the elevator down 14 floors with my shoulders level, my breathing slow, and the exact image of his hand at her waist, repeating itself with the merciless clarity of evidence. I got home before the light was gone and set my keys on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of dried oranges I had made for winter clients, then opened my laptop instead of my mouth. The first account pulled up in seconds, and the numbers came through flat and obedient, giving me 6 months of charges that did not love me back. Restaurant tabs on nights he had blamed on presentations, hotel holds during so-called site visits, and a jewelry purchase from Oak Street that had never passed through my hands arranged themselves into something cleaner than shock. At 6:42, Reed sent a text that read, "Running late. Celebrating with the team. Love you." And I left it unopened on the screen while I built a spreadsheet. I pulled invoices from my atelier, subscription revenue from my monthly scent club, workshop deposits, hotel amenity contracts, and private event retainers, then totaled 3 years of work I had been trained to call small. The number sat there without apology, larger than Reed's annual income, larger than his language for me, and large enough to make every old joke about the scent thing sound like bookkeeping. I moved my share of the liquid funds into an account already in my name, canceled the cards tied to our joint spending, and wrote down every confirmation number before midnight. Then I called the locksmith because the brick house on North Center had come to me through my aunt, stayed titled to me through marriage, and no longer needed Reed's key. By the time the new locks clicked into place and the receipts were stacked beside my laptop, I had not cried, not called, and not once mistaken evidence for emotion. The next morning, an email reached me from Hannah Cole, the finance coordinator at Reed's firm, with a subject line plain enough to survive a panicked second look. "You should have this." She wrote that she had seen me leave the office, had understood more from my face than from any rumor, and could not sit at her desk pretending ignorance. Attached were screenshots from an internal email thread, reimbursement logs tied to the hospitality account, and one line from Reed about needing the contract secured before he exited his current situation. I met Hannah that afternoon at a coffee shop near DePaul, where she arrived carrying no folder. No printed pages, only the careful posture of someone who had rehearsed being honest. She told me Celeste had approved charges that were coded as client development but matched weekends, dinners, and hotel stays with no legitimate event trail. And then she pushed her phone across the table. What I saw there mattered more than the affair itself. Because once Reed called my marriage a situation and once those expenses lined up against specific dates, the lie stopped being private. By evening, I was across from Abigail Shore, a divorce attorney with a conference table clear enough to make every document feel expensive, and she read in silence until the room changed shape. Then she looked at the reimbursement records, looked at the email, and gave me the first useful sentence I had heard since Thursday. "This is not just infidelity. This is evidence." She marked the marital spending, separated the house from everything else, and told me Reed had handed us a better case than most people ever get. For 12 days, I did not answer Reed, though his messages arrived every morning and night with the same shifting pressure. Confusion first, then irritation, then the careful softness of a man trying doors. He wanted to know why the cards failed, why the locks had changed, why our accounts no longer behaved like extensions of his body, and he kept circling the truth without touching it. I read every text once, stored screenshots in a folder, Abigail had me label by date, and went back to work because silence was doing more for me than any argument could. Miles Driscoll, the forensic accountant Abigail brought in, built timelines from charges, reimbursement codes, and transfers until weekends turned into exhibits and dinners turned into categories with totals beside them. While he traced what Reed and Celeste had spent, I finished scent flights for 2 winter weddings, packed subscription boxes, and signed a revised hotel contract at a higher rate than my last one. By the 4th day, I noticed I was eating full meals again. By the 6th, I slept through the night. And by the 8th, the house sounded less empty than accurate. I also walked through the coach house with a contractor Reed had dismissed months earlier and approved the sunroom expansion he once called impractical, which now sounded like his word for anything built without him. Abigail prepared the filing. Miles finalized the report. And Hannah's records sat cross-referenced beside my own until every private lie had a matching number, date, and source. By the 12th day, I was no longer waiting to be chosen, explained to, or spared. And that was the part of the preparation no one in Reed's world was equipped to read. At 8:03, the cocktail room at the Midwest Hospitality Honors was full of the usual polished noise. Glassware, donor laughter, and men congratulating one another before anything had officially been won. Reed stood near the center of it, with Celeste Dunn close at his side. Both of them wearing the calm glow of people already living inside a future they believed had cleared. I watched from the far edge of the room with a glass of sparkling water and the envelope Abigail had prepared, already delivered into the hands that mattered. The process server crossed the carpet without hurry, stopped in front of Reed, and asked if he was Reed Barron, giving him one last ordinary second before the night split open. He answered with that public smile he used on investors, and then she placed the papers in his hand and told him he had been served, while Celeste's shoulders locked so suddenly it looked painful. By the time he looked up and found me walking toward them, the nearest conversations had already thinned into that careful silence people use when they know they are about to remember every detail. I handed Celeste the preservation notice and let her read just enough to understand that deleted receipts and polished faces were not going to save either of them now. Then I gave Reed the only sentence he had earned from me, that he had spent years calling my work the scent thing, and that thing had paid for the house while his lies paid for hotel rooms. I left him standing there with a divorce summons in one hand, a champagne flute in the other, and the exact audience he had always wanted, finally seeing what he had actually built. Reed did not stay for the awards program, and the contract his firm had spent a year chasing was announced to a room that now knew his name for the wrong reason first. Abigail moved fast after that, using the title history on my aunt's house, Miles's forensic report, and the reimbursement trail Hannah preserved to divide what was mine from what had been drained through deceit. Reed's attorney pushed once, then stopped pushing when the dissipation schedule was attached in full, because $14,300 tied to dates, vendors, and false business coding is not a story. Celeste's fall came differently, which felt fitting, because she had built hers inside conference rooms, approvals, and the polished language of operational necessity. The preservation notice led to internal review. The internal review led to client scrutiny, and the same receipts that looked ordinary in batches turned ugly when separated from the lies that had hidden them. No one needed a scandal headline after that. In their world, the quieter judgment was worse. And once people stopped trusting her signatures, her title became decoration. The divorce closed 4 months later with the house untouched. My business, fully mine, and a repayment order requiring Reed to restore the marital funds he had burned financing another life. He left with his car, his clothes, and the kind of professional exile that never sounds official until you notice someone has to start over 3 hours away. By then, the only sentence from Abigail I still carried was the cleanest one, that courts do not repair dignity, but they can recognize records. And in the end, my records were better than his excuses. The first thing I built after the divorce was the sunroom Reed once called impractical, and now morning light moves across my work tables like it was always meant to find me there. My atelier grew faster with him gone, not dramatically at first, just steadily, through larger hotel orders, a stronger subscription base, and clients who no longer found me by accident. By spring, the revenue from my scent club alone covered the mortgage, and every invoice that cleared felt less like recovery than proportion returning. I also stopped accepting the old terms that had made my life sound smaller than it was, which changed more than the business, though the business changed beautifully. Women came for private blending nights and stayed long enough to exhale, and the room smelled of neroli, cedar, and whatever relief becomes when it finally has somewhere to land. When people asked what I did, I no longer softened it for their comfort. And I found that the right people leaned closer when I told the truth plainly. That was how everything better started. Not with a grand arrival, but with accurate language, clean records, and a house that felt fully inhabited by the person who paid to keep it. Reed had mistaken visibility for value and charm for structure, and by the time he understood the difference, he was already outside it. I was not healed because he lost me. I was healed because, once he did, nothing in my life had to shrink to make his reflection look whole again. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this story found something tender or familiar in your own life, stay close, subscribe, and share it with someone rebuilding quietly. I hope it reminds you that peace can return, love can return, and so can you again in full.